write down your thoughts, questions as we about to start at 5 minutes. Greetings, everyone. We'll be getting started in 2 minutes.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Masonic Seminar Series. My name is Katie Kumsie, and I am your presenter on this forum, which is created and sponsored by Universal Co-Masonry. I want to welcome everyone who is coming from North America and those from around the world, especially those in the Philippines, who also serves in the study center. So good morning to those in the Philippines. Thank you for joining us. I have with me here in the studio, I have Brother Patrick Alessandra and Brother Benjamin Hartle. So I want to say thank you to them as they are working the IT and the various platforms on which we are streaming the Masonic Seminar Series. Brother Benjamin will be taking care of the questions in Zoom, and Brother Patrick will be taking care of X, Facebook, and YouTube. So for those who are coming on those platforms, welcome as well. Universal Co-Masonry created the Masonic Seminar Series to help build better information and understanding of what Masonry is about in general and what Co-Masonry is about in particular. We've been presenting this particular platform for many years now, so I want to say it's about 7 years, and with much success, so we'll keep it up. Each month we present something new, so if you are joining us for the first time or the first time in a long time, welcome, and don't worry, you can always find out what we talked about in previous sessions. It is posted on YouTube, and I send out now on our invite each month the past month's recording. So those who are joining us from places where it's 2 a.m. and they don't want to get up in the morning to listen, we will be sending that out to them as well. So for those who are familiar with our other group, which is the Masonic Philosophical Society, we are a little bit different here. This is a lecture-based series, so you will hear me talk a lot, and I hope that you enjoy it. Please have your favorite drink next to you, coffee, tea, water, whatever it is, and something to write down your thoughts and your questions so that you can be very present during the presentation. I will stop maybe once or twice just to see where we are with understanding and check in for questions that might arise. If you do have a question or want to share a comment that is relative to what we are talking about, please use the virtual hand option. Tonight we are presenting, I am presenting the Freemasonry and Alchemy. Last month I had talked about doing Kabbalah, but I have decided, because I always like to go with my intuition, to go with alchemy. And I will give you a little bit of background of my personal history with alchemy, and it's kind of anecdotal, but you can take it or leave it. But I think it kind of builds out the context of how I'm going to present this evening. Next month, as I said, will be Freemasonry and Kabbalah, which is in July. Please know that in August, we are at our Masonic convention. So we will not be here in August, but we'll be back in September. And I'm not quite sure where I want to go with our presentations for the fall and the winter seasons. I'm looking at doing some things that are related to the Western Esoteric Tradition, but I'm not sure. So hopefully I'll keep you in suspense until we have it all sorted out to what would be the best direction. As always, this is the Masonic Seminar Series, so we always talk about Masonry. If you are a Mason coming from another obedience, please keep in mind that Universal Co-Masonry keeps a lot of things private about rituals and ceremonies. So if I cut you off in the middle of a comment, please don't be offended, as we don't want to disclose any of the rituals so that those who do join will have an experience that is authentic to their own understanding. So that being said, we're going to move forward for the next hour and a half to talk about Freemasonry and alchemy. Now, I want to give you again a little bit of context. I'm looking to my right here because that's where my screen is. I'm going to share my screen with you. So for the past several, is it sharing? Is my screen sharing, gentlemen?
It is.
Okay, because it's not showing up on mine. For the past several months, we've been looking at the Western Esoteric Tradition and the various topics that go along with it, because Freemasonry has moved, it's from time immemorial, as we say in Masonic tradition. We don't know when it started. We know it's very old, and that at some point it moved through the Western Esoteric Tradition and into the present day. And so to understand a lot about the aspects of Freemasonry, which is syncretic, and syncretic means that it pulls from a lot of different places. It has its own philosophy as well. And so it creates a whole new entity. It's not necessarily borrowed systems, but there are some similarities. And as we don't disclose a lot about Freemasonry, again, to preserve the experience for the initiate, it is important to understand it through various aspects. And that's why we have been looking at the Western Esoteric Tradition. So let me get into my screen. I may have to call Brother Patrick over because I think I can't see my screen. So everyone say hi to Brother Patrick as he helps me figure out some IT here.
Just click on PowerPoint down below.
Right here.
Yes.
Perfect. There we go. Thank you, good sir. All right. So, as I said, we'll be talking about Freemasonry and alchemy. Now, I want to give a discussion a little bit about alchemy by itself as a standalone before we put it in the context of the Western esoteric tradition. Um, I have a very long history with alchemy. I'm not saying that to like be an expert on the topic, but just to give an idea, I sat many years ago in an MPS before it was called the Masonic Philosophical Society, sitting in the first center that we had. And I was talking with another brother, and she was talking about knowledge and about how, she doesn't have to get it, through the mining of information, that it can be like a direct, I call it a divine download, that you can unzip your head and it just comes in. And she started talking about alchemy, and I was like, yeah, that's just alchemy is a pseudoscience. And I come from a scientific background, and I think that's where my prejudice came from, which is, if it's not chemistry, or if it's not the empirical sciences or physics or something like that, that it's not genuine. And obviously, it was the arrogance of my ignorance. So I went on a mission to prove her wrong. How sad is that? I went on a mission to prove her wrong, and in that process, I proved myself wrong, which is a very gratifying experience, especially in science. We like to do falsifiability, where we try to prove ourselves wrong. In this case, I got the good reward out of it, even though I approached it probably not in the best way of doing it. Not my prouder moments in life. However, I've always been very grateful of that experience with this brother, because it sent me on a journey of trying to really understand alchemy for what it is. It has, like we've seen with the other particular Western esoteric traditions and the science, which is last month we looked at astrology, it has its own evolution and has evolved in a very different way. In the Western cultures and civilization, it's easy just to think there's one set of alchemy or one set of astrology. And hopefully, for those who joined us last month, you saw that there are many systems of astrology. And just like astrology, there are many systems of alchemy. So this presentation isn't based off of my personal whims or anything like that. It's actually based off of genuine research and looking at correlations between alchemical systems and really trying to understand why so many spiritual traditions and mystery schools use alchemy, because they did. And if they're using it and it has persisted for more than 2,000 years, there has to be some value in it. Else it would, the vicissitudes of time would take it out. And that's kind of where I want you to realize what this presentation is about. And hopefully at the end of the presentation, you will get something out of it that you will find worthy of your reflections and discussions. So how we're going to spend the next hour and a half together, I just want to bring up the different alchemical systems because, and it's not an exhaustive list, because there is a lot in there, and I'm only going to focus primarily on the septenary system, which is the name I gave it because I thought 7 steps sounded just really mundane. So I called it the septenary system. So if you start Googling it, you probably are not going to find it under that name. We'll look at the different alchemical systems. Then we'll look at the 4 Western esoteric traditions and the context. There is some variations. Don't worry if you're not familiar with Gnosticism, Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, and Freemasonry. I do go through it a little bit, and you're always welcome to go to our YouTube channel and find those particular seminars and watch them on your own time. The septenary model is where we're going to focus the most, and then we'll look at the 4 stages of the Magnus Opus. And what that looks like. And that I hope we can get to. We may not. There's a lot of information. So that's my overstuffing of my presentations. I always want more than I think we'll get to, just in case we do get to it. So if you're really jonesing for that 4-stage discussion, I will admit it's more of an honorable mention and a tie-in. So we'll spend a lot of times on the 7 steps. All right, so to the different types of alchemical systems. As I mentioned just a minute ago, we have the 4 stages or the 4 steps, and this is Negrito, Albedo, Centronitas, and Rubidio. These are Latin names for the blackening, the whitening, the yellowing, and the reddening. The interesting thing is when we look at alchemy, and I'm just going to define it in case we have some individuals, and we may have a lot of individuals who are not familiar with alchemy, maybe have an understanding of it more as a pseudoscience. A lot of people kind of chalk alchemy up to the precursor to, medicine and chemistry. Although there was a lot of assistance in that direction, you can thank the Chinese medicine and sciences for what we have today. They had the greater influence than just alchemy. Alchemy definitely led into it, but it wasn't the sole contributor of modern science. So alchemy is that transformation process. Now you have various interpretations. Traditionally, in the modern sense, a lot of people look at alchemy as a psychological transformation. So we're um, going from a base material, which is called prima materia, and going into a perfection of sorts. We're looking at either the philosopher's stone or the elixir of life. The one thing I want to clarify, it doesn't matter which system you do, the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life are two separate things. And I think when I started studying alchemy, in my 20s, like I thought I conflated the two. I thought they were the same and was just kind of, I don't know, it was very elementary understanding. And they're not. The elixir of life is like the fountain of youth. It is something that will do longevity of life. And the philosopher's stone is the stone that whatever it touches it transmutes the base into the perfect. If you take it literally, it takes the base into gold. And I think a lot of people have looked at alchemy and have taken it literal, and that's why it's been dubbed as a pseudoscience, because in order to do base metals into gold, you have to do a different type of chemistry, if you will. Alchemy plays more with electrons, and if you're looking at trying to change the fundamental nature of something, you have to play with the protons, which are inside of that atom. And so there's no way to do it with the chemistry approach. You have to do it more from a nuclear approach. So keep that in mind. So alchemy is going to be that transformation from something less to something greater. Modern days, because of Carl Jung's great influence, we see a lot of psychological, interpretations of how that process works. A lot of people who are aware of what alchemy is look at it as an inner transformation. And then you have the novice who might think of it as a literal translation of trying to get base metals into gold. And my hope is to move away from that literal that literal understanding, and move into more of that spiritual inner work. Masonry definitely focuses on that inner work. It could be psychological, but I would say it's more of a spiritual umbrella, and the psychological is obviously underneath that. It would be a part of it, but it's not just specifically psychological. So you have the 4 stages that look at how to transform from the Negrito, which is the lowest, to the Rubido, which is the highest. And back in the day, they used to think that, or they described the philosopher's stone as red. So that last stage is a reddening, and that's why you get the name Rubido out of that. As I said, we'll talk about the septenary. I'm not going to talk about it here just because we're going to talk about it a lot. There's 7 steps in the septenary that is going to show how the initiate works on themselves to gain a certain goal. And we'll look at that in detail tonight. This one is an interesting one, which is it has 12 stages, because you're looking at the 12 zodiacal signs, and each sign having a different stage of purification, refinement, destruction, depending on what sign you're in. And this one, to me, not that the Hermeticists necessarily use this particular system, but it's more akin to that each sign has a lesson and a punishment and a power that goes with it. So to me, it kind of rings more of Hermeticism. Again, I'm not saying that they used it, but it's kind of that similar idea where you work through the 12 stages. There was a brother that I didn't meet, that was very wise from my understanding, that believed that she believed in reincarnation, that each of us pass through one of the zodiac with each incarnation, and our job is to, once the 12 have been exhausted, to ascend. And I always thought that was a very fascinating perspective, and I wish she was still alive to talk to her about it. The other one you have is also kind of a septenary model. It's 7, but it's based off of the classical planets. So we're not looking at a heliocentric, we're looking at a geocentric model, with the Earth being the center. You can also look at it with the 7 metals, as well as the 7 virtues. The 7 virtues breaking down to the theological and cardinal virtues. So faith, hope, and charity, fortitude, temperance, justice, and prudence. That would be the planetary or virtue model. You have the Kabbalistic alchemy, which is going to look at the Sephiroth being each one being a stage in transmutation. So if you're really into Kabbalah, that would be something that they would use to help interpret as you work through the Sephiroth. And like I said, next month we will for sure be doing Kabbalah. Not Kabbalistic alchemy, but at least you can lay it over if you come back next month with us. Now the Trio Prima is interesting because the Spagric alchemy they're the same. It means three. And I actually did a picture here, and it's salt, sulfur, and mercury. So you have this Spagric alchemy, which is going to be the actual alchemical, transmutation steps. And the Trio Prima is the philosophy that supports it. That's why I put them together. So if you have heard one or the other, they actually work in tandem to create a system of understanding of salt, sulfur, and mercury. And you will see, even I'm not an art connoisseur, but I like to say that art's really important. And so I have picked to do the 7 steps of alchemy in an Islamic art form, because we will see that the golden age of Islam and many Islamic scientists of their time or natural philosophers had a huge contribution to alchemy, and one of them being salt, sulfur, and mercury. And so in recognition to their contribution, even though I don't talk about this particular system, I did do my art in an Islamic art style just to give a honorary nod, if you will, to their achievement. Oftentimes you'll see a chemical wedding model, and this has to do with the red king and the white queen coming together, so the union and reconciliation of opposites. I have to say I'm not very familiar with this type of alchemy. I am familiar with the manifestos of the Rosicrucians. I've read them all. They're not very long if you're really interested in reading them, especially the Chemical Wedding by Christian Rosenkreuz. And I think that's what that's based on. But like I said, I'm not super strong in that area, but I wanted to mention it because it is an alchemical system, and it may speak to you, and you may know a lot about it or want to. So those are the different ones. But what I want to do is we're going to talk, like I said, about that septenary: calcination, dissolution, conjunction, fermentation, that one. But before we get there, I need to give you some context. So we're going to look at the 4 Western esoteric traditions, how they use alchemy, and then we're going to give that separate piece of the alchemical model, and then you can overlay whatever system you really would like to. I'm going to obviously do the Masonic one, but you may choose to do Gnostic or Hermetic or Neoplatonic. I will break them each down by philosophical worldview and how the alchemical influence played a part. So if you remember, or if you know, the Gnostics believe that materiality is extremely evil. It's created by a false god. And so this mortal frame is a prison house of the divine spark. So the divine spark is trying to escape. That is the kind of, again, this is a good simplification, but it is a simplification that I think is accurate. It's ultimately the Gnostics are trying to, through mystic Christianity, find a way to mine out the divine spark, get out of this body, and get it back to the source. Now, the way they use alchemy is, again, they're going to use an alchemical system, but they're going to lay over the idea that you have to go through the inner planes in order to get rid of the illusion. Because remember, according to the Gnostics, this reality is an illusion. And for most of the Western esoteric tradition, reality is what we perceive with our 5 senses is not real. It's an illusion of our 5 senses or more, and it's something to trap us in the body. Maybe I'll do a seminar presentation on the dichotomy of, or the mind-body dichotomy, where we have the soul and the body really fighting for ownership of this existence. And the body wins by default if you do nothing with it. The soul is not as strong as the body because we're in the realm of materiality, and the body's of the material. So if you really want to liberate that divine spark, that piece of the divine that is trapped within you, you really have to work to weaken the flesh in order for that spark to escape and to ascend. And again, they use alchemy to really break that down. Then you have Hermeticism. And when we look at Hermeticism, it's kind of an animation in the fact that the Hermetics believe that everything is living. It doesn't matter what it is. could be a rock, it could be a person. It doesn't define living the way that modern science does, which last I checked, there was 5 or 6 different criterion that you had to have in order for something to be, classified as living. The Hermetic believes that everything is living. Everything has some level of consciousness. And so by doing that, it changes the way that we interact with materiality. It's not evil like it would be from a Gnostic perspective. It is what it is. And what we're trying to do, if you're Hermetic, is to live in harmony with the cosmos, right? And have that harmony of the spheres. Not only is it to be a part of the cosmos, so to be present, but also to transcend it. And the main law that governs the Hermetic is the law of correspondence. As above, so below, as within, as without. That everything is related. So if I can look outward, I can understand what's happening inward. And I would say that there is a very large Hermetic, I don't know if it's influence is the right word, but I would say that Masonry is more like Hermeticism, then more like Neoplatonism, and then maybe a little bit like Gnosticism. So it kind of degrades down in how much it's like that. So if you're wondering, that you don't really necessarily grok or grasp what the law of correspondence is, I would really check that out and really understand what that means. And check it out could be, you could research it, or you can go out and experience it in nature and see what that's like. By just looking at observations and how things interact, relationships. So the next part, again, we have that man is dichotomous, that you have the body and you have the human and the divine, and that we are not fully human unless we have that integration of the divine, and that we can get out of a controlled existence by the body through knowledge and will. And again, I would say Masonry is a lot like this, again, with the knowledge and will. Masonry is not an easy path. I think some people have joined in the past and probably will join in the future thinking that, life will be easier when you're a Mason. That's not the case, because when you become a Mason, you are accepting a responsibility of proactiveness, of introspection, and of a willingness to change that which needs to be changed, which we'll talk in more depth with alchemy. You are taking that on and saying that you want the spirit to be in control of this existence, not the body, and that you will understand what you are trying to gain. So you will go through knowledge. You will go do that by will. And when I use knowledge, I use that in the very Greek sense of the word, not in the modern sense. Knowledge is not necessarily, a fact that you can download from the internet by a press of a button. Knowledge is a true understanding of the cosmos. And so just like the Hermetic, the Mason we sit down and we truly try to understand how everything operates. And it's really hard for me to know what a quasar is doing. So, I don't live right next to a quasar. So, looking at nature and understanding quasars and seeing if there's anything like that and trying to apply that knowledge to my life. For an example, it's like the idea of violence. This is very abstract. The idea of violence, and I'm talking like meta. I'm not talking about like domestic violence or stuff like that. I'm talking about just violence, like, a deer gets killed by a lion, or I don't know, a mouse gets killed by a cat, that type of violence. Is that natural? Is that moral? And it's like, well, if you look at how solar systems are created, it's created through the violence of matter colliding in with matter, the explosion of things. And so it's trying to understand violence in its natural context, and then layering on a different level of free will. Now, how does free will impact that knowledge? So it gets very complex, very, very easily and very quickly. And the Mason and the Hermetic will try to get to transmutation through knowledge, and it's only through the exertion of will. Because, man, it's really easy to sit back and just, enjoy life and eat, drink, and be merry. It's very hard to get off the couch and to go make your dharma happen, and that's really hard. And so that's kind of that worldview that Hermetics have, is what Masonry shares that. So how is the alchemical influence? So when the Hermetic is looking at alchemy, they're seeing it as a mirror of creation. So instead of saying you are bad, and looking in the mirror, I'm a bad person, you are bad, you're evil, you're base. It's saying I am of a divine creation, and I have to learn how to understand how that creation works in order to help it advance. Because again, the Hermetics thinks that evolution is continual, right? Everything is evolving forward. And so if we are trying to influence that evolution to go quicker, we have to look at ourselves in the mirror and see what works and what doesn't, and then make that happen. But there's no vilification again of the flesh. It's just that this isn't where we belong and we need to move forward. And what I love about Hermeticism, and I like a lot about Masonry, is that we're co-workers. I like to use that word a lot, is that we're co-workers, and we work with the divine logos. We work with the great architect. And the only way that we can work with that is if we understand the rules that are put out. So again, there's that knowledge to sit down and make a daily advancement in understanding. And again, it's not just to be, the smartest man in the room. It's to understand the first principles of everything. And that's a tall order to fill. How does all this work together? Oftentimes I'll tell people when they're like, oh, like I struggle with this or that. Go sit at a coffee house or go sit in the park and just watch people and their interactions and see how they behave. And you'll begin to understand human nature. And if you extrapolate that further out, you can understand what is governing human nature and what are the principles that support that. And it then just blossoms out into a greater understanding of everything. And maybe a coffee house isn't your scene, then go sit outside under the night sky and look at the cosmos and look at the frozen pieces of history that you get to look at that other people don't 100 years from now, that the sky will be different looking in some way, and try to understand the nature, not just the empirical observation of gravity and the stars sitting as they are and the lights taking forever to get to us, but the metaphysical interaction, how they play together, that cosmic symphony, and then try to deduce that down into this existence and seeing how that plays together so you can become a co-worker and assist not only yourself but others in the advancement of self-transformation. So again, it goes back to that idea that we're doing miniature divine actions, that even though we're not the creator, we can assist in what the creation is doing by doing repetitious or ritualistic acts to help further the evolution of whatever it is we're working with. We're going to go to Neoplatonism and Freemasonry, and then I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions. So if you're starting to get questions, get ready, because I'm going to have a moment where we can all have a discussion. So looking at the philosophical worldview, we have discussed in the past, and as I said, you can find it on our YouTube channel, about emanations. And emanations are going to be rippling out of the divine. So different stages of existence that are all connected to the divine and create the fabric of reality. I would say Masonry also holds this viewpoint in some way. You'd have to find it. It's not written in some, book of doctrine, but it is there that the fabric of the universe, the cosmos, are an emanation of the great architect, and whatever detail you want to put that in. And that in the Neoplatonic version, man has fallen from the one, the singularity, into multiplicity. So you'll see the tetractys, that you have the 1, the 2, and the 3, and the 4, that is showing the fall of man into multiplicity. If you were to invert that tetractys upside down, that would be going back to the source and having union with the one, which is gnosis. So you have gnosis, Gnosis, which is true knowledge of of reality. And then you have henosis, which is going to be the union with the source. And we have to do that in some cases through alchemy. There are other ways, but the alchemy to the Neoplatonic person is going to be an ascension. And I think that's a word I've said a lot over the past couple months with seminar, is that it's just this path of ascension back to the source, to have hypnosis. And I always think it's interesting that man has fallen from the source. I grew up in a religious tradition that didn't believe in the original sin. And I have come to understand it in a very different perspective about man falling from the source. I don't know if it's necessarily an evil act. It was an act that created what we have. I don't know if necessity makes it good, but it does make it that it's real. It is what it is. So falling in out of the source and into matter, that descent, and then having that ascent, that light motif coming back over and over and over again, we see that the fallen isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's not a great thing, but there's something that the divine spark needed that caused us to go into matter. Because when we return, when we have that kenosis, we're not the same divine spark, right? Something has changed fundamentally. Don't ask me what that is, because I think if I knew that, I wouldn't be here. But there is that process of descending into matter, gaining all of the conflicts and strife of our personalities, and then going back through matter and through the emanations as you get closer and closer to the light, and then eventually to the one, shedding off all of those trials and tribulations and flaws, and putting on the virtues of those lessons and the virtues of those vices that got transmuted. Again, that vice to virtue transmutation. So you'll see that the Neoplatonic alchemical use would be to help the practitioner to move from multiplicity to unity. And again, the magnum opus would be the reflection. So that great work is going to be the reflection of this. And so once that happens, that whole pathway is going to be the magnus opus. Okay, so one more slide, and then we're going to stop for some comments and questions. So, of course, I'm going to really, really fall in love with the Masonic context because it's so relevant in a lot of ways. So the philosophical worldview, when I was sitting down and putting this presentation together, I was really thinking, like, if I had to write a book on Masonry and its philosophical worldview, what would I write in it? And ultimately, in my studies and understanding and experiences as a Freemason, it would come back to the idea that we are of divine origin. We have forgotten that heritage, and it is a process of returning back to the source or the great architect. It's a little Platonic in the sense that we have to remember. Plato believed that we have forgotten what was real and then, replaced it with the unreal. And our whole purpose in this life is to remember what it is that we have forgotten. And I think in some ways, Masonry is a lot like that. Is that every single one of us, it doesn't matter how far they have fallen from the path of virtue, everyone has a divine origin. And that all of us, no matter the greatest of us all and the less of us all, we're all working towards the soul, to get back to the source. And that is a process that can take, in some people's opinion, one time, and for others, many, many lives. You'll see that, again, there's that compilation of all three of the other traditions, the Ascension, which is going to be Neoplatonic, the Gnostic, which is going to be that idea that this is the prison house of the flesh, but it's not, to the Mason, it's not evil. It's just something to overcome. It's an obstacle, is probably the best word I would use. Maybe there are some brothers that believe it's evil. So I guess that's up to interpretation, but I would say, ritualistically speaking, it's not saying that matter's evil. It's an obstacle, and we need to overcome the pull, the gravity, that spiritual gravity that just locks us in and doesn't allow us to advance. Masonry doesn't just think that you have to collect facts. You have to have the trifecta of reason, faith, and will. A lot of people will want Masonry to be one thing or the other. It's very, humanist, or it's very religious, and it's really both, and not in the middle. It's its own thing. It's a triangulation. In Masonry, you have to have reason, and you have to have faith. And faith in what? That's really up to each brother to put together. When you look at reason and faith in the Masonic context, you have to have the will. You have to make it happen. It can't just be, something that you think about and it, someone once said, I do this spiritual work. And I'm not quite sure what that meant, because they were saying they didn't have to physically work because they did the spiritual work. We all have to work. We all have to put that in motion. So that's going to be something that Masonry, it's why we wear aprons. We're builders. We are going to get dirty from the work. And so we are trying to make that ascension happen and that unity with the one through gnosis to have kenosis. So in our alchemical system, this is interesting because we have that refinement of the rough stone. So in Masonry, we see, or excuse me, in alchemy, we see that there is the prima materia, which is the starting material. I'll use the word substrate a lot. It's the starting material from which all things come from. So each one of us have our own prima materia. Excuse me. So the prima materia is, we're going to refine that in Masonry. And like, how do we do that? Again, I can broadly say through ritual, through brotherhood, through solidarity. We'll look more about that through this septenary when we go through that. But when we look at the meta of Masonry, we have an advanced degree system, and it's called a ladder. Each order has its own ladder. And in Universal Co-Masonry, we have more of a Scottish Rite ladder, even though it's infused with the York Rite. But each degree, which is going to represent a rung on a ladder, right, and is going to represent a process in the refinement of that rough stone, the prima materia. And in Blue Masonry or Craft Masonry, you have the first 3 degrees. In Scottish Rite, you have 33rd degrees. In the Memphis Mizraim, you have 96 degrees. You have a lot of different, the Egyptian Rite, they're all different. And each degree is going to represent a process in the refinement, that alchemical influence. So each degree can have maybe the total process for that understanding. And then you have that alchemical process. And then as a degree system, that's going to be the meta, the macro is probably a better word, a macro alchemical experience. So those two tie together. All right, so I'm going to stop here and I'm going to open the floor for comments and questions. Again, if you're coming from YouTube, X, or Facebook, please put it in the chats and Brother Patrick will take care of it. If you're coming from Zoom, you can put it in the chat or you can raise your hand and we can talk to you one-on-one. Anthony, you have your hand up.
Yeah, hello. Thanks again for what you guys are doing here. You talked about the zodiac, I guess maybe a progression type of thing. I believe I've read something along those lines before. I wish I could remember where or what it had to do with. Anyways, I'm curious if you by any chance remember, or if anyone else has any knowledge to the aspect of that I found interesting was there's like a beginning and end point along the zodiac of that progression as far as where it started and ended with. And then you talked about these colors, black, white, yellow, red. I've noticed maybe certain flags and certain heraldry where that is prevalent colors, also potentially with Native American symbolism and certain prevalent primary color symbolism. I could be totally wrong with this and misappropriating other colors, but I'm curious if anyone else or yourself has any knowledge to this, specifically these colors or anything else along the lines of this specific color combination. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Anthony. Brother Patrick, it's Aries and Pisces is the cutoff, correct? Because it goes backwards. It goes from Pisces to Aries.
So Aries is the first sign of the
Aries.
zodiac, and then it ends in Pisces.
Right. So Aries is the beginning, if you didn't hear him, and Pisces is the end of that process, which I always think is a really interesting way to cut it. And perhaps Brother Patrick is a better person to answer the reason why it is that way, but I do know that it's that Aries Pisces cutoff. In regards to the heraldry, it's interesting that you asked that question, Anthony. I can't say I know anything about Native American, so I won't speak to that. But I know in heraldry, there's a lot of rules on what colors go with what. Certain metals don't go with, you don't want to use gold and yellow and stuff like that. But that's the limit of it. And whether or not it relates to alchemy, I am unsure. It would really depend on whether or not the nobility, had alchemical advisors to their coat of arms and whether or not it goes far back. So I would open the floor up for anyone who can answer that question because that is an unsatisfactory answer. I do not know outside of that whether or not it was based in alchemy or if it just runs parallel to. Sorry, Anthony, I could not answer that better. Aisha, you have your hand raised.
Hello, thank you so much. I had a question specifically in regards to initiation. I was wondering if it's possible to be initiated without knowing it? Like, for example, if you have regular contact with someone who is in possession of their divine spark and is full of a lot of light, if maybe that could inadvertently transfer and spark your own initiation, or if there's just some sort of spontaneous initiation, like can you self-initiate maybe without even being aware of the process? At my own personal experience, I started doing the alchemy and whatnot without even realizing what was happening at first. And in tracing that back, I'm kind of thinking it may have had to do with contact I had with a particular Mason or two around that time. But I'm just wondering, is that anything that you've ever heard of?
Is it Aisha or Isha? Oh, we have to unmute. Okay, there we go.
Sorry, it's Isha. Thank you.
I thought Isha, and then I was like, nah, I'm gonna be different. I think it's Aisha. All right, Isha. So the ceremony of initiation for initiatic orders, so which Freemasonry is a part of, they are specific rituals that set and mark people apart from the rest. So when you have interactions with people that elevate your consciousness, that doesn't degrade that experience, because absolutely are there people that you come into contact with and you're just like, man, they have put me at such a level I don't think I could have done on my own. It's kind of that punctuated graduation where you just go higher up in your consciousness. It's not a self-initiation. That's a preparing for initiation. So when you look at initiation, it is something you must physically undergo to have that spiritual demarcation. So I would separate them. It's not to reduce one over the other. It's to say that they are different and one requires the other. You need that elevation in consciousness to prepare yourself for the elevations of consciousness that are going to come after it, which is going to come through the power of ceremony. And again, that's with all initiatic orders, not just Freemasonry. Tyler, you have your hand raised.
Yeah. I was actually just going to try to answer some of Anthony's question from earlier. So if you like dig a little bit deeper into that and go looking at the coats of arms and the colors, and also things like the Rider Waite, which is like later English tarot, all of these colors that she mentioned earlier come up, and they're not necessarily always translated like yellow doesn't necessarily just have to be yellow, but there's always four, and they represent the four elements, which will come up when you're studying alchemy also. Likely put into the heads of these, monarchical figures by their advisors who would have been priests studying this stuff, especially in the Germanic and Bohemian regions. You're going to have a lot of the quote like Christian nature philosophy, which was essentially their way of saying alchemy without saying alchemy in a lot of cases. But you're onto something correct there. You just dig a little bit deeper and you'll find it.
Thank you, Tyler. Patrick, do we have anyone from the... Okay. All right. We are going to move forward. Benjamin, I didn't ask if we had anything from chats. Okay. We're going to move forward and we're going to look at the 7 steps of alchemy. Now, I'm going to... excuse me. I'm going to do it through the Masonic lens, and you can definitely put any other lens on it that you like, but I would like you to suspend at least your opinion for an hour or the next hour, 45 minutes as I walk through this, because it is something that's really important. Do you have to believe in alchemy to be a Mason? No, but I don't think that changes the impact that it can. I think it can change the profundity of that impact. The belief in it does heighten and elevate the impact that it will have on you, but you will still be changed by it whether or not you believe in it. So one of the strongest motifs that you will see in alchemy is solve coagula, to solve and to bring back together, which is something that really is important, because oftentimes you can meet people who just don't really like who they are, unfortunately, and they want to obliterate everything about themselves. And Masonry and alchemy isn't about that obliteration. It's about refining and purifying. Like I said earlier, everyone has virtue. Everyone has the divine spark within them. And, to obliterate that is to obliterate that. And that's not something we're looking at. The one thing that going back to the very beginning when I was telling you a little bit about my personal history with alchemy, the one thing that I really struggled with, there's actually two things. As I was working through understanding alchemy as it was versus what I thought it was, the first thing that I struggled with is that alchemy is transmutation. Now, in the scientific lens, transmutation means to move from one identity to something completely different. So going from lead to gold. Now, again, in science, in order to do that, they have different number of protons, and that creates their identity. So you have to change the protons to get lead to go to gold. And I didn't like that because I was like, that's like saying, I'm not enough. I don't really like that line, but I'm not enough, and that everything about me has to change into something else. Again, that's an arrogance of my ignorance in the sense of it's in the inner alchemy, the spiritual alchemy that Masonry is working with and is utilizing isn't that complete destruction of the self. It is actually removing that which we perceive as our self that is not our self. And so it's inside is the gold, on the outside is the lead. And so it's removing what's not gold and finding the gold and preserving the gold and getting away from those impurities of the lead. That's the first thing I didn't like about it. And then I, again, came into an understanding that allowed me to understand the system better. The second one hails from more of the Renaissance, mystical Renaissance movement, and looking at alchemists like Robert Boyle and Sir Isaac Newton and the likes. And what I struggled with them was because an apprentice was hardly ever taken on by an alchemist. And again, they were doing practical alchemy where they were literally physical alchemy, trying to get the base into the gold. And again, they were working with electrons, which sit on the outside, and they weren't working on the heart, which is the protons. And so they were always tinkering with its reactivity, not its identity. And that's why they never really were able to do what they were saying they were doing. Now, what I struggle with that is because I know that knowledge, truth is done through transmission, that it passes on from one person to the next, which Masonry is a big fan of. It's like, it's not just about me having the truth, it's about sharing it with those who are ready and passing it on so they can pass it on so we can keep that connectivity to the truth, the original source, that perennial wisdom, and making sure that it survives in all ages, no matter how enlightened or devolved that era is. So I always struggled with those two things, that I wasn't enough and that there was never an apprentice. Now, understanding that, I was never enough, I already explained the apprentice part, taking it from an inner spiritual work, I understand now why they didn't have apprentices. And that is because only you can do your inner work. Like, I can't do it for you. I can provide you all the stuff in the world to help you. But again, at the end of the day, you have to want to do it. You have to have that willpower to do it. And I think, although during the mystical Renaissance period with alchemy, they were seeing it more as this is me and my journey in the flask, and I'm the substrate, and I don't want anyone a part of it. They even had their own languages and symbol that they didn't share between people, which is why we can't necessarily figure out what they did, because we don't have their quote unquote Rosetta Stone to decipher it. I get why they were doing it, but at the same time, there are some things that can be communicated, and those things should be communicated so that the art passes on, the truth passes on. All right, so solve coagula. So here's the septenary. So the first step is going to be calcination. And I have put on each slide the element that this stage represents. In this case, it's fire. Now, looking at calcination, you are the substrate. You're the prima materia. And in alchemy, the body is represented by the cube of matter, right? And when we look at fire, we're looking at burning down that cube as much as we can. Now, in all things, just like in cremation, not everything turns into ash. There are some things that survive. Now, when we look at calcination in this first step, this is the first step that Masonry uses to help us remove those systems which are fallible. So taking our worldview, taking our belief systems and our general nature, ideologies, and when I use the word ideologies, I use it in the tradition of what it means, which is political, right? Those political philosophies, taking all of that and throwing it into the fire and seeing what comes out. That which comes out may not necessarily be the truth, but it is closer to the truth. And that which is consumed is going to be that which is not durable, is not eternal. And so in the first step of alchemy, we're looking at calcination, and we're looking at reducing everything into that white ash that will reduce and leaving behind the white stone of matter. This is a very painful process. Because, when you look at it, especially I think today, a lot of people identify with their beliefs. Instead of saying, this is me and this is what I believe and this can change and that's okay, it's like, if you attack this, you attack me. And so what was connecting our beliefs and all that to us has become really thick, has become very strong. And so any attack to that, when I say attack, I don't necessarily mean it in the violent way of, like, I'm trying to destroy you, although it could mean that. Someone just challenges it and says, I don't agree with you because of this, this, and this. And it's like an insult, an injury to my moral, fabric of my being. It's like, no, Masonry is trying to help us push off those things that are really not us. So if you want to exercise in calcination, what you should do is get a piece of paper, put yourself in the middle, put a cube. You can put me or your name, or when I say me, like the letters, not me personally, but ME. You can put your name, whatever you want. And then do kind of like a chart that comes off of it, of all the different things you believe in. And then see what you can cut away without injuring yourself. And if nothing can be cut away, that might be a good thing, or it might be a bad thing. You have to assess that. And you have to see what is it that's going to need to be consumed. So when we look at the question, what burns but is not consumed? So some things can endure the test of fire, and that may point to a more eternal, closer to who I am as the divine spark. Keep that in mind, who I am as a divine spark. So in Masonry, oftentimes, most of the times, or you should, get the experience of challenge, right? When you get initiated, the challenge of who you are. So, someone says, well, this is, if you say, this is what I believe, and someone says, well, why? Or can you support that? Like, it's hard because oftentimes in, normal social circles, people are just like, that's nice. And they move on, whether or not they agree with you. So in Masonry, they should be challenging you, not for the sake of challenge, but because they want to understand. So if you're like, I believe in God. Okay, what are the details? Why do you believe in God? And it's to have a conversation, and you may walk away being like, I need to really investigate some of those questions better because I don't know. Or, I was saying all this stuff and I don't know if I believe all of it anymore. Like, I've changed, I've grown, and I don't know if I believe all of those things. I need to really assess whether I think the divine is this, this, or this. That's the fire. It is extremely uncomfortable because this, you can think of it as an emanation, if you will. This is the closest to matter. We are entrenched in our ideas. You'll see that this particular step is represented by salt because of the rigidity of the actual NaCl structure. It's very rigid. It's based off of ionic bonds. It's really hard to break. And fire is what will break that down. It will overcome the attraction of our body to materiality, because there is an attraction, like attracts like. So this is done through will. You have to sit down and look at yourself. If you cannot introspect, you need to learn how to survive Masonry. Not the people, but the system, the ritual, the philosophy of Masonry, because it will constantly put situations in your life that make you question what you're doing. And that is a good thing. It's not to be a perpetual skeptic, right? It's to help you say, am I on the right track? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Do I really believe what I just said? Or am I parroting? And you may be saying the right thing, but for the wrong reasons. And you need to straighten out those reasons. Anthony, I see that your hand is raised. Go ahead and throw in your comment or question. What's going on?
Yeah, thanks. I guess I'm thinking, the common phrase ignorance is bliss, but I think I find often people want to buy the lie, if you want, because it's easy. It's the lazy way out, right? Because often truth is hard. It's extremely difficult, as you say, as you allude to. And then these different control systems, they rely on propagation of lies. And as a lot of like almost I'm not sure the proper term, but there's a lot of colloquial messages where lies are self-propagating, so you have to keep lying. So if you find new knowledge, you're caught in the lie, if you will, and in the public forum, you have to continue with your previous knowledge, otherwise you're a liar.
That is a very astute observation. It's hard because you don't want to offend, but at the same time, you don't want to lie either. And there is in Masonry the art of rhetoric. And I mean that in the most Greco-Roman possible way, not the modern sense of like trying to persuade someone by sophistry and, ill-founded logic. I don't mean it that way. But, here's an example. And I know a lot of people don't like this, but it's a great example. So if I were to come to you, Anthony, and say, does this dress make me look fat? Right? Most husbands will say, if you want to keep your marriage, you lie to the woman and say, you look great. Okay. Yeah, I don't want that. Right. I want you to tell me if I genuinely do not look good in this dress. Like I do, like, yeah, Kate, that's not your best dress. Maybe you should go pick something else. Like either, or maybe I need to go to the gym. That conversation is a hard truth to have. And when we look at Masonry, there's a way to say it. We are taught in the way of saying things. So if someone came to me and said, Brother Katie, does this just make me look fat? I wouldn't be like, oh yeah, it does, right? That doesn't work. I would say, that's not your best dress. I liked this one, or maybe you should try that color. I would give a positive solution to the problem. I wouldn't try to destroy where it would be easy to keep up with that destruction. Likewise, I wouldn't say, no, you look great. Because I'm really just setting them up for failure because they're going to go out into the crowd thinking they look like $1,000,000 or maybe knowing that I didn't tell them the truth. And that doesn't help them present themselves in their best light. And so coming into new knowledge makes it hard because, as you said, going into old systems, you don't want to lie, but you also don't want to destroy. You want to build those bridges where the destruction could be easy. So it puts you in a really, really tough place. And when you look at that is the path to the greater self. How do you build in the midst of new knowledge and old systems? Because it creates a friction that you can't escape. And I think that's a very astute observation from you, Anthony, very astute, because it becomes very difficult. And sometimes you realize that just being honest is the nicest thing you can do, as long as it's not like you have to be like, oh, like you don't have to coddle or enable. Sometimes looking at someone and being like, that dress just doesn't make you look good at all. And that's that. So I know that's a really mundane example, and a lot of people get ruffled by that because I've used it over the years and I don't know why. But likewise, don't come up to me and be like, that dress makes you look fat, because I didn't ask. So if I didn't ask, don't ask. Answer the question I didn't ask. So there's a way of working through that Masonry helps with that knowledge, because it is a responsibility. When you come into more knowledge, there's a responsibility of how that knowledge is communicated, because you don't want to destroy what's behind you and you don't want to destroy what's in front of you. Excellent observation. So calcination is the first step. It's the burning away of old systems. The next step is a little bit more tricky. It's done with water. It's dissolution. And water is a universal solvent. It's what dissolves the most. Dissolving is not melting. They are two different physical steps. Dissolution is going to be the actual breaking down. So when you here's an example, table salt, right, is NaCl. So if you put table salt in water, that's dissolving, right? So it tastes like salt water. So you have the water that's getting in between the bonds of the Na and the Cl. To melt salt, you actually have to take fire and the salt, and you have to melt it. It's just purely NaCl. There's no water in it. So they're two different systems. Dissolution is talking about water going in. So you have this white, kind of deformed cube, if you will, with all this ash around it, and you're adding water to it in the inner work of alchemy, and you're washing away not only that which is already coming off, but that water is getting into that structure even further. Like I said, with NaCl, you have water going in between the sodium and the chloride, and it's trying to weave its way through and break apart that attraction. Not all of the NaCl dissolves. Some of it still stays attracted to each other. The water's not quite strong enough to get in there. But when we look at this as a personal inner transformation, there are some structures within us that are still not us. When I say the self, I'm talking with the capital S, that's not that divine spark. They're stubborn structures. And, they need a little bit more of a massage to break their control over us. And that water is going to not only wash away that which was already falling off, but it's going to help weaken those systems that are not the truth, that are not really us. So if you're looking at that map of that paper and you were able to cut off some stuff and say, okay, that wasn't me, that's not me, and you have some things left over, then you have to, add the spiritual water to it and say, okay, now looking at it intuitively, what's really not me? What's really not the divine spark that is me? And then you'll start to see some ideologies and philosophies and opinions start to further away from you, while others are still holding close. And that is the process of dissolution. That is that spiritual water working in there to wash away that which you don't need. Like, you don't need that idea. That idea is not you. That idea doesn't ring true. And it starts to look at those more stubborn, rigid structures. So not only are you going in on yourself, so there's that inner descent, but it's also a step closer to the divine source. Again, you can think of each step as an emanation, but an emanation towards, not away from the source. So you're going towards the great architect, the source of the divine sparks. A question you can ask yourself is what dissolves when not forced to stay. So once you add that spiritual water and you're looking at your personal map, ask yourself this question and see what is already weakening. And that will help with that process. I'm going to go through one more slide. We're going to go look at separation, and then I'll stop and see, check time. Yep. Stop and see if there's any comments or questions that anyone would like to interject. Separation is very interesting because if you look at the traditional Azoth, the Azoth is, you can just put A-Z-O-T-H. Gentlemen, if you could throw that in your various chats, A-Z-O-T-H into your search engine, you'll see a 7-pointed star that comes up. There's a face in the middle, which is the alchemist, and there's very alchemical art. If you look at the Azoth, in most interpretations, you'll see 2 birds. The separation is the bird going in and taking away and pulling apart the good from the not. And this, I didn't want to use the birds, not that there's anything wrong with them, but I thought would be more, what's the word I'm looking for? Personable, more effective is looking at the various faces you have. So as you are looking at all the different things on your map, think of those as the different faces you have. And you have to look at it and say, okay, that which remains, there's some stuff that's on the periphery that got burnt away. Some of the stuff that's now weaker, that's still connected. They're all different faces of you. Are they genuine faces? Are they really who you are as a divine spark? So you have to start the separation process. Now, I have heard over the years how people are like, oh, I was brought up in this belief system and my parents, really hosed me, whatever. I don't like it. It's important that our parents gave us something, because as we get older, we have to look back on that system because that's the system we know best and say, is that really what I believe in? And you may come back to it and say, absolutely. Or you may look at it and say, that's not it. But then you know what needs to be replaced, because we all need belief systems. Even the atheist has a belief system, and even the nihilist has a belief system. And it may be a limited belief system if you're a nihilist, which is there's no purpose to anything. It's still a belief system, and we all have to have that. That is a part of our spiritual and material makeup. And so when we look at the system, we have to see what is good and what is bad. And this is what I was talking about with the obliteration of the rough stone. You don't want to just break the stone down and just wash it all away and call it garbage. There's some things that are really, really good about that stone, and there's some things that you don't need with that stone. And that separation requires an authentic and genuine conversation with yourself. Again, here's that willpower. This is air. So when I say intellectualizing, I don't mean it in the academic sense. I mean it in the esoteric, occult, metaphysical, spiritual, religious sense. Whatever word of that, resonates with you is the one to use. But this isn't an academic approach. This is literally sitting down with your reason, your intuition, and your will and saying, okay, which one of these faces is closer to me? Or is this one? Is that one? And you're going through and you're just picking, and it's not just like a random, luck of the draw, a lotto. It's looking at what is really who I am. And that's a hard place to be, because some of the faces are not good faces, and it's really who you are. So what I mean by that is the vices that we have, those things that are the furthest from virtue. We all have them, and looking at them and saying, I can't get rid of that face. That face, unfortunately, belongs to me, and I need to fix it because it's getting in the way of my divine spark. I can't, you can do the Jungian thing, which is to integrate it into the shadow, integrating into your person. You can do the Freudian thing, which is to get rid of it. It just depends on your approach and your belief. But this is, what is truly owned and what is only ever borrowed. Sometimes, like I said, we borrow systems all the time from people. There's not a system you believe in that someone else hasn't believed in. And it's not a system that you have come up on your own. Because when we look at that, their belief is limited to certain structures. Whether or not you think it's personable, or if you think it's, an exoteric religion, doesn't matter. We all have belief systems. And if we have borrowed it and we have found that it to be true, then we truly own it. So I will take religion, any religion you want. That's the religion you grew up in. You have really processed it. You've really sat with it. You've studied it. You've come to understand it. And you are like, okay, I borrowed this system from my family, my parents, and now I actually really see why they did it. It's a beautiful system. I own it. It is mine. That is not a borrowed system anymore. You own that. Likewise, if you come to it and you say, yeah, I like this. It's not that I like it. Like, this is real and this isn't real. And you go through it and you work through it. Then you're really sifting through a borrowed system to make the parts that are closest to the truth a owned system. And this isn't to say that you should go cherry picking. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm saying that what's good or bad is whether or not you process that ownership. Just to keep something, as Anthony said, it's easy just to keep someone's system and not really process it. But easy isn't necessarily right. And so if we are to become closer to that divine spark within us, to give that the true governance of this existence, we have to really assess who we are. In Masonry, this is why we have brothers who are experts in Masonry that sit there and say, here are the tools that are at your use to help you in this process. If someone came to me and was really off the path of separation, saying, there's nothing good about myself, or I've seen there's nothing bad about myself, everything's great. It's that process of saying, okay, well, what about this? And what about that? And tell me more about this. And again, it's not to get them to come to my conclusion. It's to see if they can really assess that introspection correctly. We don't want to destroy that which is good, and we don't want to keep that which is bad. In either situation, that's the case. So Masonry gives us the ability to have, and this is why we have to have a sound mind, so that we can truly rationalize, intuit this conversation of introspection, which is, again, a very difficult step. I'm going to stop here for a couple of minutes and see if there's any comments or questions, and then we will move forward to the next part. Any comments or questions, Patrick, Benjamin? Okay. I will move forward then. Okay, the next step is conjunction. For those who have heard me talk about alchemy, I've done several presentations over the last several years on alchemy. You'll have heard me say that conjunction is the peacock stage. That is not a name I gave it. It is, I don't know where I heard it, but it really stuck in my head. The conjunction is, this is going to be earth. So we saw fire, we saw water, we saw air, and now this is earth. Conjunction is where once you have burnt away all that could, you have washed it in solution to see what can still be weakened, and then you went through and you picked out that which should be kept and that which should be discarded. Now you have to heal it, or as I like to say in the scientific word, re-anneal. It means to come back together. You have to re-anneal it into a whole structure. So the reason why this is called the peacock stage, it is often represented with an iridescent hue, like a peacock's tail. And a lot of people who undergo this process think they've actually achieved the Philosopher's Stone. It's a false end, if you will. because they feel so alive and they feel so new and like they hit gold, you know, that they've reached that coagulation. And indeed, they have not. The work is only halfway through. And so we have to be very careful as Masons. I often, for me personally, this hit when I became a Master Mason, because now you know, the first degree, you're like, you know, this is a whole world that I'm not familiar with. It's not overbearing, but it's a lot to take in. It's kind of like a fire hose feeding. Then you become the second degree, which is a fellow craft, and you're, you know, going through like, this is now familiar. I'm learning a lot of things, but this is actually pretty familiar. And then you become a Master Mason, and you're like, I know it all. At least that was my experience, unfortunately. I know it all. And then quickly you realize, no, I do not. And so you have this kind of falsetto experience of, yeah, I'm it. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect for those who know what that is. Where you just think that everything you have experienced is now at the finality. Conjunction is more than a false ending, though. It is bringing back together. This is the alchemical marriage of the Red King and the White Queen, coming back together in a new substrate. Again, that starting material. Before it had all these impurities in it. Now it's bringing it back together. That's why it's earth. It's containing into a new form. It is not purified like we think it is when we experience it. It still has impurities in it. So when you look at, after all of that separation on that map and you're pulling things apart, this question is, how do you bring it all back together? How is this going to unite into one new substrate? This is the process of healing. Masculine and feminine energy is very, very important in every human being. We all have it in different ratios. And when we look at that masculine and feminine, and I'm talking esoteric, archetypal, when we bring those together, they have to learn how to come together, because you have the Apollonian spirit of the masculine, and you have the terrestrial experience of the feminine, and one is the sun and one is the earth, and you have to bring them in a unified experience. And that is tricky. And I'll talk about the next stage, which will help bring them together. But oftentimes you'll see this particular image with the king and the queen coming together in a marriage, that alchemical marriage, trying to create a whole new substance. Again, in Masonry, I would akin this to any part of the degree system where you think as a Mason, like you know it all. And every one of us has it in some variation. Some are much greater in their pride and someone's much less, but we all have it where we just think we know what we're doing. And then life comes around and tells us otherwise. So as I said, this is a reconciliation of male and female, or reason and faith coming together. If you are sitting on one side or the other of any of those, like all male or all female, or all reason and all faith, I would challenge you to see the other side. Carl Jung called this part, not just this part, but this was individuation, where you have the two forces coming together. In Masonry, we call it faith and reason, bringing those two together and trying to see how they coexist, because they do coexist. In our very linear mind, we think one can only exist over the other. The fifth stage is an interesting one. It's fermentation. And the reason why it's interesting is this is the only stage in alchemy that has an organic life force a part of it. Up until now, if you look at practical alchemy, you have vitriol, which is going to be usually a sulfuric acid or some type hydrochloric acid, some type of mixture of acid that you pour, which is going to be inorganic. It's going to pour on top of your substrate or your stone, if you will, and it's going to dissolve it, and it's going to be caustic and just destroy it. It's going to do all that stuff. And then you have fire, which is, again, is going to be an oxidation process. It's not going to be an organic. But when you think of fermentation, think about the process of making grape juice into wine. In order to do that process, which is fermentation, you have to have a bacteria in there. And that bacteria has to eat the grape juice and ferment it in order for it to become wine. And we're no different. The difference, though, is not a bacteria. It is a divine force that animates the two sides together. So in the fourth stage, when we look at conjunction, if you look at them as masculine and feminine archetypes, they're very different between the two of them. And your masculine is going to be, again, it's Apollonian. It's going to be very much towards the sun. And you're going to have the feminine, which is going to be intuitive and receptive and analytical. It's going to work together very differently. But how do you bring those together? Because they do come together. And the way that it's done is through that divine force that's going to animate them together. That once you overcome the resistance, that animation of the divine force is going to bring them into a new substance completely. And it's like kind of like the biblical approach of, God breathing life into man. It's kind of like that idea where you see the divine force is going to take that substrate, and it's much more truer to the self than it was back in the first step of calcination, but it needs to be animated. It needs to have that breath of the source coming back through it. And the question you ask yourself here is, what must be consumed to awaken the eternal? So as that masculine and feminine, as that reason and faith is being consumed by the divine animating force, some of it will remain and some of it will not. And how do you keep that which is eternal? And the eternal will need some type of consumption in order to be, which is a very interesting thought. And the element is actually the fifth element, which is going to be the ether or the spirit. And it's a different spirit than the animating force, the divine force. So this step is the one that is going to have the spirit as a part of the process. So again, you're looking at the consumption of the masculine and the feminine, the faith and the reason, into something animated, something that's alive. And that's very, very important. Masonry looks at this and saying, okay, you've gone through the process of calcination, dissolution, then you have separation and then conjunction. You've gone through that. Where is the great architect in all that? And again, it's not that it's anthropological, meaning that you have to have a man sitting, a being, which you can, but it doesn't mean that you have to. It's that creative force. But where is the great architect in all of this? It's not just you alone with the male and the female, the reason and the faith. Where's the great architect? What brings that all together? And how does that allow you to be consumed? That divine force to consume you so that you can raise to a higher consciousness, spiritual consciousness. And if you're like, man, I don't know what the great architect is, you really should ask yourself over and over every day until you have some answer. And it shouldn't just be something that you sit with, though that's a part of it, that contemplation is a part of it. It should be something that you actively pursue. Again, remember, Masonry is very solar. It's very active. It's not just, again, that divine download where you zip your head open and just it dumps in. Though it may happen, but it's very rare. You have to work for it. I have to go a little faster, running out of time. The next step is distillation. Distillation, when you look at distillation, I want you to kind of picture this idea. You have a very complicated glassware system, and you have on one side, you have fire, and then you have that round bottom flask, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a flask round, and you have your substance in there, which is interesting because it's not solid like the beginning substrate, that prima materia. It's going to be some type of mixture. It's a liquid mixture, and we still have impurities inside of that are much more fine. So again, once you get past that conjunction peacock stage of saying, okay, I am not perfect. There's a lot of things that I need to fix, but they're more refined. It could be like we were talking earlier. How do I exist with new information in old systems? How do I advance the human right? How do I advance spiritual growth? How do I do all those things without burning the bridges of the people I interact with? So that distillation, you have the fire that's hitting that round bottom flask. Impurities have different boiling points. And that's an interesting thought, to think of the spiritual boiling points, that the impurities within us are going to burn differently than the sacred flame within us, that divine spark. So you add a temperature to it that will drive off, either it will drive off the impurities or it will drive off what you want. Depends on how you look at it. So we'll say that it's going to drive off the impurities here, right? So it's driving it off. So it's pulling away even those other systems that you're like, oh man, how did that get in, escape the separation process, or how did it escape the dissolution process? It's going to help drive those off. So what's left in the flask is going to be the purest substance you can make at this time with the consciousness that you have. That is distillation. What lingers should be the best parts of you. We want to make sure we pick the right flask. We don't want to go to the one that has the impurities in it. We want to pick the one that has the right flask and stay with it. Masonry gives you a lot of experiences that put you through the refinement or distillation process. This process is both fire and air. It's going to be both. You have spiritual fire and you have the esoteric air, that intellectualization coming together to help drive off those impurities. So when you sit with a favorite brother of yours that, is very wise to you, and you just sit with that person and say, I was thinking about this, what do you think? That's a process of distillation, because they just know how to get in there just right and tell you, the right questions, ask you the right questions, get you to think differently. Masonry uses degrees to do this, and drama of those degrees to help put you in different situations that you didn't necessarily know you would react that way. And it allows you to assess, again, that shadow. That's usually where those impurities lie psychologically, is in the shadow. How do you get to look at yourself when you can't see that? It doesn't help that everyone else can see it. I need to see it. And there's parts of that shadow that no one can see that I need to be able to have access to. All right, we're going to go to coagulation. This is the last step in the sequence. Coagulation is interesting because this is a blend of earth and ether. And I'll explain the reason why in a second. There's a lot of different ways you can interpret this stage, but ultimately it comes down to a hermaphrodite, a blending of Hermes and Aphrodite into a single being. So it's neither male or female. And it is going to be the closest the substrate, that beginning prima materia, can get to the divine spark. And it's going to be that which is eternal within you. So you are now more divine spark than you are matter or materiality. And this represents your more purified state, your higher consciousness refined. This is you at your highest consciousness at the moment, refined. Like I said, you're less body and more spirit. The interesting thing, and I think this is akin to a winding staircase or a spiral staircase, is that a lot of people might think that alchemy is just 7 stages and then you're done. It's 7 steps and more. You're constantly moving, right? So what becomes the philosopher's stone in this step becomes the substrate or the prima materia when you start this all over again. And ultimately, that's what Masonry is trying to get us to understand. Whether it's in one life or multiple lives, it's irrelevant, that we're constantly going to take our philosopher's stone and use it as a substrate and continue up that winding staircase to a higher and higher sense of understanding and awareness and gnosis, to have that union with the source. And that's why you see oftentimes that winding staircase in Freemasonry as a symbol. Even though you are, what seems like you're in the same location 7 steps later, you're actually higher up, right? Even though technically you're not even in the same point of space, but at least you're in the same plane of space. And then you go again the 7 steps, and then again the 7 steps. And you're constantly in the process of refining until all that remains is that divine spark. What you see here is that alchemy isn't an obliteration of what, who I am as an individual or who you are as an individual. Alchemy is the taking away of the materiality that obscures the absolute radiance of the divine spark. And Freemasonry uses a part of alchemy, right? It uses that transmutation process, which people would say is alchemical, to do that. How it looks for each person is very different. It's interesting because although we all go through the same ceremonies in Masonry, if you're in the same obedience, rituals will vary from obedience to obedience, but we all go through the same ceremonies, and yet we have very different outcomes and very different experiences within that. It becomes very personal. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that our consciousnesses are at different levels. Even if you have someone who's at a very high consciousness and comes in as the first degree, they will acknowledge that they have to start at some place to elevate that consciousness even higher. They're willing to be a first degree because they know they're still not at the end. And so that process there's a lot of ways that you get on that winding staircase of ascension and transmutation. People come onto it at different levels, but it's continual. It goes on for forever until eventually that, again, it's like kind of like the Tower of Babel, where you go until you reach the heavens and you can reach the source. So that is the 7 steps and more. There's a lot more that you can do with it, but obviously time is going to be restrictive. But when we look at this, we are all in the process of this. Some people are sitting just outside the door of calcination. They're not ready to stick their self into the fire, if you will, and really burn away that which is not them. But someday their time will come, and they will. And there are others that are already on this process and unwillingly do so. This is why the requirements in Freemasonry of sound mind, morals, and all that are really important, because if you are not of sound mind, if you are not healthy in every possible way, I'm not saying perfect, it's just healthy, then this process can be very damaging because you need to be able to discern what is that which is worthy of keeping and that which is not. And if you can't do that, you end up throwing away that which is the most important. So I will leave you with this slide. This is the 4 steps. The 4 steps takes the 7 steps and just puts it into a more compact perception, not to minimize this particular stage or this particular system, not stage, but system. But it is similar to what we just went through, and you can do it in 4 stages if you want. Some people prefer 7, some people prefer 12, but it all ultimately comes back to you have a descent, you have a clarification, or I like to say a refining, a purification, then you have an understanding of that purification, that awakening, and then you have that last step where that purification and that awakening come together to give you a new sense of being. And you can do that in this life. Hopefully you do that all the time, that you're continually progressing inwardly so that you can progress outwardly. And then if you believe in reincarnation, you'll see this is the transmigration of the soul. The soul is constantly evolving from life to life. That, I believe, puts us 1 minute over the hour and a half. So I'm going to stop here and just say thank you to everyone who joined us this evening from around the world and in North America, as well as Brother Patrick and Brother Benjamin for their assistance, and for you for being here. You are the reason why we do this. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, and I look forward to seeing everyone at the next seminar. If you have questions about applications, if you have questions about Masonry, please, please, please do not hesitate to ask, as we are always here to answer questions in whatever way you need them. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening or a wonderful day or a wonderful night, wherever you're coming from, and we will see you next month. Take care.